Arunima was born in a small town in India, where dreams were often smaller than the skies above the houses. Her family didn't have much, but her mother's eyes always carried quiet strength, and that strength became the seed of Arunima's courage. From the time she was little, she loved to run. She loved the feeling of wind on her face and the sound of her heartbeat matching the rhythm of her steps. When the other children played quietly, she would be out on the field, chasing a ball, falling, getting up, falling again, and laughing. Sports were her freedom, her escape from everything that tried to tell her she was ordinary. She grew up in a world where people believed girls should be calm and careful, but Arunima was never calm. She was fire. Her dream was to play for India, to wear her nation's colors, and to make her mother proud. She became a national-level volleyball player, and though money was always tight, her passion burned bright enough to light the way forward. But life does not always reward fire with glory. Sometimes it tests it with darkness. In 2011, when she was just in her early 20s, she boarded a train to Delhi. She carried a small bag, a dream, and her courage. She didn't know that night would change everything. The train was crowded, and as it moved into the quiet of night, she sat near the window, thinking about her future. Suddenly, a group of men entered her compartment. They tried to snatch her bag and gold chain. She resisted. She fought back, a young woman alone in the dark, shouting, kicking, refusing to give in. But in that chaos, one of them pushed her out of the moving train. The world turned black. She fell onto the railway tracks, and before she could move, another train came rushing from the opposite direction. Pain exploded through her body. Her left leg was crushed completely. She lay there for hours, bleeding, half-conscious, calling for help that didn't come. The night was long, the stars cold, and yet in that unbearable pain, she kept telling herself one thing: I must not die here. She pressed her wounded leg against the stones to stop the bleeding. She was alone, helpless and broken, but not defeated. By morning, someone finally found her and took her to the hospital. The doctors looked at her leg and knew what had to be done. They amputated it to save her life. When she woke up, the reality hit her like thunder. She had lost her leg. The girl who once ran across the fields, who leapt for volleyballs and felt alive in motion, could no longer even sit up without pain. For days she cried, not from the pain in her body, but from the fear that her dreams had died too. The media came, people visited, and some even said things that cut deeper than wounds. Her life is finished now. She'll never walk again. But those words, instead of breaking her, became fuel. One night, lying in that hospital bed, she made a promise to herself. If the world thought she couldn't walk, she would show them she could fly. She didn't know yet what that promise would mean, only that she would not spend her life in pity. She told herself, if I can't change what happened to me, I'll change what I become after it. And then came the thought that would define her destiny. Mount Everest. The idea was almost insane. A woman who had just lost her leg, dreaming of climbing the highest mountain on earth. But for Arunima, impossible was just a word people used when they stopped trying. The journey began with pain. She learned to walk again on an artificial leg. Every step burned like fire, but she smiled through it. Her doctors warned her not to push too hard. Her friends worried she might fall and hurt herself again. But she said softly, if I can survive that night on the tracks, I can survive anything. Her spirit became her new limb. Slowly, step by step, she began to move. From walking to jogging, from jogging to climbing stairs, she pushed her limits every single day. People around her were confused. Some thought she was mad. Others admired her courage but didn't believe she could do it. Then she met Bachendri Pal, the first Indian woman to climb Mount Everest. Bachendri saw in her the same fire she once had in herself, and she agreed to train her. That day, Arunima felt the first spark of hope turning into belief. She joined the training camp at the Tata Steel Adventure Foundation, where she began the long, brutal preparation for mountaineering. The training was hellish. Even people with both legs found it almost impossible. The weight of the backpack, the cold wind cutting through the body, the steep slopes that demanded everything from your lungs and legs. And she had only one real leg and a prosthetic one. Many times she fell, many times she cried. Sometimes her artificial leg would come loose, and she would sit in the dirt, exhausted. But she would fix it, tighten the straps, and continue. Her trainer once said, "Arunima, the mountain does not care who you are. It only respects courage," and she answered, "Then I'll show the mountain my courage." Every night she went to sleep with aching muscles, and every morning she woke up with stronger determination. The mountain was not just outside her. It was inside her. She was climbing not just rock and ice, but the mountain of doubt, pain, and fear that lived in her mind. Every step she took upward in training was a step out of the darkness she had fallen into that night on the railway track. And then the day came when she stood at the base of Mount Everest, looking up at the white peaks touching the sky. The cold was biting, the wind fierce, but her heart was steady. The climb would take weeks, maybe months. She looked up, took a deep breath, and began her ascent. The mountain stood tall, silent, and endless before her. The air was thin, the sky was harsh, and the cold bit into her skin like 1,000 knives. Every step on the snow crunched beneath her boots, and with every breath she could see her own fear turning into white clouds in the air. But fear did not stop her. It only reminded her that she was alive, still moving, still fighting. She carried a heavy backpack filled with ropes, oxygen cylinders, and the weight of her dream. Her artificial leg made a soft metallic sound each time she moved. The mountain did not care about her pain, and she did not care about the mountain's cruelty. All she cared about was her promise, the promise she made to herself in that hospital bed, that she would not let her life end in pity. The first few days were full of exhaustion and cold. She was with her Sherpa guides and fellow climbers, most of them stronger, faster, and more experienced. Sometimes she fell behind, but she never complained. She had trained her mind to be stronger than her body. When others rested, she fixed her leg, adjusted the straps, and kept going. Her teammates watched her with quiet respect. She didn't talk much. She just climbed. At night, inside her small tent, she could hear the wind howling like a wild beast outside. The temperature dropped far below zero, and even breathing felt heavy. Sometimes she would close her eyes and remember her old life, her mother's face, the volleyball court, the laughter of her teammates, and that one night when everything changed. She would whisper to herself, "I survived that night. I can survive this one too." And then she would sleep, holding her dream close to her heart. Days turned into weeks. As they climbed higher, oxygen became thinner. Every step felt like dragging a mountain on her back. Her prosthetic leg often slipped on the ice, cutting into her skin. Once, during a climb near Camp 3, her leg came loose and slid down a few meters of snow. She sat there on the ice, tears freezing on her cheeks. For a moment, she wanted to give up. Her body screamed in pain, her fingers were numb, and the mountain seemed endless. But then she looked up. The summit was hidden behind clouds, but she imagined it shining somewhere beyond the pain. She reached out, pulled her leg back, fixed it with trembling hands, and said softly, "You will not defeat me." Then she stood up and continued climbing. At times, the mountain tested not just her strength, but her will. There were storms that made even the strongest climbers turn back, winds so violent that tents were ripped apart, nights so dark that fear itself seemed alive. But inside that darkness, she found her own light. She began to believe that the mountain was not her enemy, it was her teacher. Every gust of wind, every fall, every wound was a lesson in endurance, in faith, in patience. When they reached Camp 4, known as the Death Zone, the air was dangerously thin. Climbers often lost their lives here. Many turned back, unable to go on. But Arunima's eyes held only one direction, upward. She thought of her mother's prayer, of the faces of those who once said she was finished, and of the young girls who would one day hear her story. She wanted to reach the top not just for herself, but for every person who had ever been told they couldn't. That night, before the final push to the summit, she wrote a few words in her notebook. "Tomorrow, I will stand where the sky touches the earth. Tomorrow, I will prove that no mountain is greater than the strength of the human spirit." She closed her eyes, and for a few hours, she slept. When she woke, it was still dark. The world around her was silent except for the howling wind. She put on her gear, adjusted her oxygen mask, checked her leg straps one last time, and whispered to herself, "Let's finish what we started." The final climb began. Every step was agony. The wind tore at her clothes, and her fingers were frozen, but she kept moving. Her breath came in short gasps, her vision blurred, and her heart pounded like a drum in her chest. The slope was steep, almost vertical in places, and her prosthetic leg made it even harder. But she did not look down. She only looked up. Step by step, inch by inch, she climbed. As dawn broke, the sky turned from black to deep blue, and the first rays of sunlight touched the snow around her. The world looked like a dream, silent, endless, and pure. She could feel her strength fading, but her spirit refused to stop. She remembered the faces of the people who had doubted her, the pain of the train accident, the months in the hospital, the blood, the tears, and she turned all that pain into power. Her Sherpa guide shouted over the wind, "We are close!" Just a few more meters. Those words gave her wings. She felt tears in her eyes, but they froze before they could fall. Her heart was louder than the storm. She climbed with everything she had, her hands, her will, her soul, and then finally, she reached the top. It was May 21st, 2013. Arunima Sinha stood on the summit of Mount Everest, holding the Indian flag in her hands. The wind roared, the sun blazed on the snow, and for a moment, time stopped. She fell to her knees, tears of joy mixing with the frost on her face. She had done it. The girl who once lay bleeding beside a railway track, the girl who was told her life was over, had just touched the sky. She looked around. Above the clouds, the world looked peaceful. She whispered softly, "This is for every person who was told they can't." And then she prayed, thanking God for giving her not just life, but purpose. That moment, standing on top of the world, was not the end of her journey. It was the beginning of something far greater, a story of hope that would inspire millions. The peak of Mount Everest was silent, beautiful, and endless. But even on top of the world, Arunima knew one thing clearly. Climbing up was only half the journey. The hardest part was still ahead, coming down alive. The air was thin, her oxygen almost finished, her body was exhausted, and her prosthetic leg was filled with frost. The mountain that had just witnessed her victory now tested her one last time. She took a deep breath, looked down at the endless white slopes, and began her descent. Each step downward felt heavier than the climb up. The snow was soft in places and slippery in others. One wrong move could mean falling thousands of feet. The wind was sharp enough to cut through her clothes, and the temperature dropped lower and lower. She could barely feel her hands, and her legs started to ache badly. But even through the pain, she kept reminding herself, "If I can reach the top, I can reach home." Her Sherpa called out to her often, checking if she was fine. Many climbers lose focus during the descent. The body is weak, the air is thin, and exhaustion plays tricks on the mind. She remembered stories of people who made it to the top but never returned. The mountain takes what it wants, and she refused to let it take her. She had come too far to die now. Every few steps she stopped to catch her breath, to fix her leg, to make sure the straps were tight. Sometimes she fell. Once she slid several meters down, the ice cutting her gloves, her knee hitting a rock. Pain shot through her body, but she bit her lip and didn't cry. She got up again and kept walking. After hours of slow, painful descent, she reached Camp 4. She collapsed inside the tent, breathing heavily. Her Sherpa smiled and said, "You did it, Arunima. You made it." For the first time, she allowed herself to relax. Her whole body hurt, but inside, her heart was light. She had not only climbed the tallest mountain on Earth, she had climbed out of the darkness that had tried to swallow her life. When she returned to base camp, the team there clapped for her. Some hugged her, others just looked at her with awe. Even the cold winds seemed softer that day. She took out the small flag she had carried from the beginning, the same flag she had promised to wave on the top of the world, and kissed it once more. It wasn't just a symbol of her country, it was a symbol of her fight, her courage, her soul. The news of her success spread across India and then across the world. Newspapers called her the Iron Woman of India. People who had never heard her name before now spoke it with pride, but Arunima didn't climb Everest for fame. She climbed it to prove a point, that no tragedy, no loss, no pain could define what a person can become. When she came back home, she visited her mother first. Her mother held her close and cried. She whispered, "You kept your promise, my child." And Arunima smiled through tears and said, "Yes, Amma, I did it." But this is only the beginning. In the months that followed, she began traveling across the country. Schools, colleges, and companies invited her to speak. She stood on stages, sometimes with her artificial leg visible, sometimes hidden under her clothes, but always with her heart wide open. She told her story, not to make people feel sorry, but to make them believe. She told them that pain is not the end, it's the beginning of strength. People cried listening to her words. Some found hope for the first time, but Arunima wasn't done climbing. She decided to scale 6 more of the world's highest peaks, 1 on each continent: Mount Kilimanjaro, Mount Elbrus, Mount Kosciuszko, Mount Aconcagua. One after another, she conquered them. Every time she stood on a summit, she thought about that night years ago on the railway tracks. The girl who almost died there had now become unstoppable. She turned her wounds into wisdom, her pain into power. She also started a foundation to help other differently abled people, giving them hope, training, and education. She used her fame not for comfort, but for service. When people asked her how she did it, she smiled and said, "I stopped asking, 'Why me?' and started saying, 'Try me.'" Her eyes always carried that same fire, the fire that refused to die. There were still days when her leg hurt, when she woke up from nightmares of that accident, but even then, she smiled. She would look at the sky and whisper, "You took my leg, but you gave me wings." That's how she lived, not with pity, but with power. She became not only a mountaineer, but a symbol of unshakable human will. Even today, when young girls from small towns write to her saying, "Didi, we want to be like you," she tells them, "Don't be like me. Be stronger than me. Don't wait for a tragedy to wake you up. Wake up now and start climbing your own mountain." Years passed after her Everest climb, but Arunima's fire never faded. She had become a symbol of courage for millions, yet she remained humble, simple, and deeply human. Fame never changed her because she knew what it meant to lose everything. Every time she stood on a stage or gave an interview, she remembered the railway track, the pain, the cold, the silence of that night. It wasn't a memory she wanted to forget. It was a reminder of who she had become, a woman built not by comfort but by courage. She used her story to light up other people's darkness. In villages where girls were told they couldn't study, her name became a lesson. In hospitals where people lay hopeless, her story was whispered like a prayer. Arunima often said that her biggest achievement was not reaching the top of Everest, but helping others believe that they could reach their own. Her foundation grew stronger, supporting hundreds of people with disabilities, giving them training, jobs, and most importantly, dignity. She would sit with them, talk to them, laugh with them, and tell them that life does not end when something is taken from you. Sometimes it begins there. One evening, she stood in front of a group of young children in wheelchairs. Their eyes followed her every move. She looked at them with love and said, "The world will try to tell you that you can't. Don't believe it. You don't need 2 legs to stand tall. You only need one thing, a reason." Her voice was soft, but her words were powerful. The room fell silent for a moment, and then applause filled the air, not just for her story, but for the strength she had given them to find their own. Sometimes she traveled alone, sitting by the window of the plane, watching the clouds float by. She thought about how strange life was. Once she had fallen under a train, and now she was flying above the world. Every scar on her body told a story, but none of them told a story of defeat. When people asked her if she ever felt angry about what happened, she smiled and said, "If that night hadn't happened, maybe I would still be ordinary." Pain gave me purpose. In the quiet moments of her life, when she sat by her mother and watched the sunset, she often whispered, "I did it, Amma. I turned my pain into power." Her mother would smile, hold her hand, and say, "Yes, my child, you climbed the mountain outside, but the bigger one was inside you." Arunima became an author too. She wrote about her journey, her pain, her strength, and her lessons. Her book, Born Again on the Mountain, touched hearts across the world. People who had never met her felt as if they knew her. The girl who fell, the woman who rose, the soul who refused to give up. Letters poured in from everywhere. Soldiers who lost limbs in war, students struggling with failure, mothers fighting for their children, people standing at the edge of giving up, all thanking her for reminding them that life is worth fighting for. She was honored by leaders, invited to speak internationally, and celebrated everywhere, but her favorite place was still the mountains. Whenever she needed peace, she returned there, not to conquer, but to remember. She would stand quietly, close her eyes, and feel the cold air brush her face. She said the mountains spoke to her in a language of silence. They told her that the true climb is never outside, it's always within. Arunima's story became a beacon for the world. People began calling her the woman who touched the sky. But she never let the title make her forget the ground she came from. She always said, "I'm not special. I'm just a normal girl who refused to stop walking." She believed that every person, no matter where they come from, has the power to rise from their pain. All they need is one decision: to not give up. Her legacy continues to inspire those who have fallen. She became living proof that the human spirit is stronger than fate, stronger than fear, stronger than loss. Her life taught that sometimes destiny breaks us not to end us, but to rebuild us into something unshakable. In the end, Arunima didn't just climb mountains. She moved them, the mountains of disbelief, fear, and limitation. Her name became not just a story, but a message. That courage is not about never falling, it's about rising every time you do. And somewhere, in the silence of the Himalayas, where the winds still whisper through the snow, it feels as if her spirit still stands there, smiling, proud, and fearless, reminding the world that no matter how deep the darkness, the human heart can still find its way to the light. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and share if you enjoyed the story, and subscribe for more stories that touch your heart.